5 seconds, Mrs. Reed.
This meeting of the Alachua County School Board is now called to order. This is a virtual meeting of the board on April 6th, 21st, 2020 at 6 o'clock on Tuesday evening. Welcome to everyone. The first item of business on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda. As Mr. Moore said, we are pulling action item 1, that's E1, from the agenda for this meeting. So then I will call for an adoption of the agenda, a motion for adoption of the agenda as amended.
So moved.
So move.
Been moved by Dr. Paulson and seconded by Mr. Hyatt. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And the motion passes 5-0. We are now at the superintendent update. So I'll turn it over to Mrs. Clark.
Thank you, Ms. Roy. Just wanted to provide an update of where we are. As everyone is aware, the governor issued not an executive order, but announced in a press conference on Saturday afternoon that we would not be returning to brick and mortar schools this school year. And so obviously that kind of shines a whole new light on different things, recognizing that now instead of 3 or 4 weeks that we're going to be in a remote learning situation, you're now looking at 9 weeks in a remote learning situation. So just to provide a brief update of where we are and where we're going on some things. Obviously with remote learning, you have some students that are working online and some that are working via in print materials, print resources and packets. We are actually working with the schools now, once we get past this week with the Wi-Fi buses just rolling, of how many students are actually still working via print resources, solely print resources. We want to get a good handle on that number, but that requires a teacher by teacher survey. So we're asking the principals to work on that. However, we did see an uptick even from Friday to Monday in device distribution, because now families have some internet access available to them. So we didn't want to jump the gun too early on that. So we're going to start working with our principals on that. They're aware of it, but we will start capturing some of that information at the end of this week. As of today, we've distributed 3,300 devices to students in our district. We still have devices available. So again, if families need a device, and some of our schools are reaching out to check to see if folks need devices, but that's where we are as of today. And we still have quite a few devices that we can distribute at this point. So we are in good shape there. Our Wi-Fi buses did start running yesterday. Unfortunately, the weather wasn't the greatest yesterday morning. So the morning usage may have been a little lower than the afternoon usage, but each day we are getting a report the next morning of what the usage was like. So on day 1, we had 170 devices, unique devices, access our internet at one of the sites using 10.1 gigabytes of internet streaming. There's some upload and download figures. I didn't think that was as critical, but that was day 1. So tomorrow we'll get day 2 and so forth. So as more and more families get connected online with devices, and obviously with better weather, we'll see that increase as the days go on. So we're pretty excited about that. From a food service perspective, we're going to hit a half a million meals served. That's, sorry to get tongue tied there, by the end of this week. So to put that in perspective, our neighbors to the south, Marion County, as of today, they've distributed 160,000 meals, and they have 40,000 plus students as opposed to 29,000. So Ms. Eunice and her team have really been responsive. We started with 6 sites back in middle of March. I said, we got to have more sites. She responded, gave us more sites. Then I asked for bus delivery. They responded, her and Mr. Thomas, to get us some bus delivery. So we're real proud of that number. Our suppliers are so far been able to keep up with the demand for the food. because part of that is making sure we have the food to prepare to pack in the breakfasts and lunches. So, so far they're able to catch up right now with that. So they're doing a great job. Obviously now there are a lot of questions, recognizing we're not going back to school, questions anywhere from, how do I get my yearbook? How do I clean out my locker? My kid still has a lunchbox in his cubby at school. What do I do? Questions about summer school, our summer EDEP, the extended day program that a lot of families rely on in the summer for childcare, Camp Crystal, the Washington, D.C. trip. There's a lot of questions out there that we are still working through. We are anticipating, and we've been told that there will be some new CDC guidelines come out on Friday. We've been told that. We'll have to wait and see if that actually happens on Friday, but we have been told that. And potentially if that will start providing some of the phasing out of the stay-at-home order, that may change how we can do things. So we have put up a frequently asked questions link on our COVID-19 page on the website. So as questions are coming in, we're just adding them to that list, because if one has the question, then we figure more than one person has that question. If we have an answer, we've put the answer on there. If we don't, we've said an idea of when to expect an answer on that, because there's a lot of logistical things that we've had to start working through as a result of not going back to school this year. Perhaps our most common question right now is our high school graduations. That is something I've been committed to since the beginning, and we are going to pull off some sort of ceremony for them at some point. Again, once we get those new guidelines of what that looks like and what that means for Alachua County, because I know that there are some states and some districts that they've already planned their virtual graduations, and that's just how they're going to do it. But that's not Alachua County, and our stay-at-home situation may be different than other districts and other states. And so once we get those new guidelines, we will look at making those decisions of when. We still are on the schedule at Exact Tech Arena and the Performing Arts Center as of right now, but we have been communicating with them for the past couple of weeks of what that will look like. So if we do move those graduations to later in the summer, potentially, as UF has done with their college graduations, and Santa Fe has also done that, then we're going to be scheduling around UF events that are already also scheduled. And we have to make sure that they will agree to let us use their facility at that point. But we're going to be, at some point, we are just going to have to make those decisions and not be able to wait it out anymore to see how things go. But we are going to be this week pushing out a senior survey, which is going to go to senior students and senior parents to talk about graduation and provide some options and let them weigh in on those options and what those feelings are. If we do have to move them past May, that may impact the students that would be able to participate in an in-person ceremony because of summer job commitments or enlisting in the military. We've already heard from some families there that their students pretty quickly, middle of June, they're gone. So we want to make sure that we are trying to capture that and still honor our seniors in a special way. We also have some other things that we're working on, things that we don't normally do for our seniors, but we're working on those right now that we want to make sure we provide them with a little extra special recognition this year because they have missed out on so much. Once we get that senior survey, we are going to disaggregate that by school and see what we need to do for those ceremonies. So we are committed to still doing something for our seniors. It might be in July, it might be in May. We are committed to doing something, but obviously we're going to have to maintain those CDC guidelines that are in place at that time. And so that could potentially mean, sitting 6 feet apart in an arena somewhere. And if that happens, then it might be that we have to limit people to 4 tickets or 6 tickets instead of just kind of an unlimited situation. But obviously we won't know that until closer to time. So that is something we are working really hard on right now. The other question that has come up has to do a lot with grading and grading of student work. And as it stands right now, we're still under the direction of DOE and statute that we are issuing letter grades. Every district in Florida is issuing letter grades right now. That question has been posed by the superintendent's group and asked that question of DOE about pass-fail for students. But right now we are still under the mandate of letter grades. What we are asking and what we have reiterated to schools, and I reiterated again today, is making sure we are communicating expectations with students and parents. So if a teacher has changed, from the way that they graded in August, 30% tests, 30% homework, or whatever that looks like, that they're communicating that to their families to make sure that everyone understands those expectations. We've had some requests for a little less work in some situations because some of our students are feeling overwhelmed. And some are asking for more work and more rigorous work. So we've kind of got both ends of the spectrum and everything in between of where folks want to be with grading. But that's something that we're making sure and reiterating to our principals, who are then reiterating to our teachers, how we are communicating that information to families. It's got to be clear so that students know what is expected of them. Also, one thing we want to announce this evening, and we'll be putting it out on our usual methods of communication, we're going to hold our version of a town hall meeting, but it's going to be a schoolhouse meeting on Thursday, April 30th at 6 o'clock. We'll have a panel of some district staff members from some areas that there tend to be a lot of questions from, as well as a few of our principal representatives there to answer questions. It'll be a call-in format, very similar to what the city of Gainesville has done. So it would just be a call-in type of situation. We've already worked it out to make sure we would be on channel 12 as well, so that families could at least watch that if they wanted to, or just listen in via phone. So there'll be two methods that folks could participate in that. So we're starting to roll that information. We just finally got the go ahead and the arrangements made with the company who's going to facilitate that for us, done late this afternoon. So be looking for that information forthcoming, but that'll be next Thursday, April 30th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. So finally, recognizing the new norm that we're in, that we've gone from, we've now been in remote learning for 4 weeks. This is week 4. And if you count the week before spring break and spring break, students have been home for 6 weeks. Some of that newness has worn off. And for some, online learning is going great. Kids are logging in or they're doing their packets and everything's okay. Others are experiencing great frustration, and we understand that. I have to admit, in my own house, we've been frustrated at times with some of the not understanding links or how do we access this material. I mean, it can get frustrating. I understand that. But that's frustration on the part of students and families, but also on our teachers and our school leaders. This is a new way of work for many, many folks. We had a lot of teachers that were already on a Google Classroom type setting that they used in their classrooms, but many were not. So there's a sense of frustration in a lot of our user groups and a lot of our school board family. And then we also have, situations where families, parents are having to work remotely. So they're still working their regular job and trying to help their students. Or maybe they've been furloughed or laid off during this time, and there's that extra stress on top of online learning. We understand that, but we want to make sure that we as a school district are doing an excellent job of communicating with our families. That's also a two-way street. If there is a need, we've asked our families, and please reach out to your child's teacher, reach out to the school. But we also want to make sure our schools and teachers are reaching out to our families to make sure we are, providing support where needed, accessing materials where needed, to be able to make sure that our students are still progressing and are still, moving forward, even in this unique situation. So I know that was a little lengthy, but I just wanted to provide that update of where we are right now, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Clark. Now I'd like to ask Mr. Moore to explain how public comment is going to work.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in addition to what we initially advertised with the option to send emails to our issues@gm.sbac.edu address, or to come to the district offices and participate like we did at the last meeting in March, where one person would be brought in to the computer at a time. We are going to try tonight to add a call-in function. And so there are 2 numbers that people will be able to call during the meeting. One is for those who wish to speak on something that's on the agenda, such as the COPS issue resolution or the 1 mil resolution. And so that number is 955-7613, which is hopefully being shared on your screen right now. Again, if it's not, it's 955-7613 if you wish to speak about something on tonight's agenda. And if it's more general citizen input for something that's not on the agenda, that'll come at the end of the meeting. And the number to call for that is 955-7544. That's 955-7544. And when they call in, instead of the little lights that you normally see in the boardroom to tell you when you're getting close to your 3 minutes, I have a little bell, which hopefully won't be too loud. It'll sound like this, that I'll ring at 30 seconds and try and quickly silence so I don't disturb the speaker. But just to let them know that they're getting close to time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moore. We are now at the consent agenda, so I'll ask the superintendent to read this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I recommend that the school board approve the consent agenda as described in items 1 through 14.
Is there a motion to approve the agenda as amended? Excuse me, not the agenda, the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
No move.
Been moved by Dr. Paulson,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Hyatt. Any discussion on the consent agenda?
Madam Chair, I just wanted to say that when I looked at the Casaldi report for Sidney Lanier, it took me back to my elementary years. And I was a student there starting in 1956 through 1963. And I have a feeling some of those buildings that are still there will no longer be there. But I can attest that they're ready to go. So I just thank you to the hard work with facilities and getting these studies and getting these evaluations done by the state. It's not that easy with the demand statewide, and I do appreciate the work of the department. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hyatt. I think we all do.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I'd like to comment on the waivers. I think that's one of the best things we have in our contract with the union. I mean, we have waivers where people can, if the school, the union and the school board get together with the administration, you can get things, you can have a different way of approaching your schedule. Example, Hawthorne High School has a 4x4 that gives them 8 classes each year, and so does Lofton. And this helps them, get their kids that extra work. Mebane goes 6 out of 7. Those teachers are willing to work an extra period there. Santa Fe High School has the power hour. And then, of course, we have Aikman Jones, which has their own special schedule. I think it's 5 out of 7. And High Springs is because they're one school actually with their elementary. So they have, they sit there and they have a different schedule. So I just wanted to point that out. It's something that I think is, you talk about charter schools, those are charter schools within our district. Except for the people who are voting to do something different. Because charter schools were set up to be laboratories, not to be money makers for people. So anyway, I thought I'd point that out because I think that's something we should all be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Paulson. Any other discussion on the consent agenda? Hearing none. All in favor then? Aye.
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 Hello?
Aye.
Okay. Tina, I didn't hear you. Did you say
I
aye?
said aye.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I
And
said
Dr. McNeely?
aye.
Okay. The motion passes 5-0. We are, as we have agreed, we are skipping the action item number 1, E1, and going to the resolution number COP 2007. Mr. Rella?
Thank you very much, Chairman Roy. As you guys no doubt recall, we set forth with the sales tax referendum and developed with the help of course, facilities, principals, school-based administrators, communities, and all stakeholders to develop a really comprehensive list of projects that we intend to fund out of the sales tax and the 1.5 mil over the next 12-year period at that time. And that was, of course, in 2018. I can't believe it's already been a year and a half. It's gone by very quickly. If you recall, there was a series of projects that we felt really strongly based on the needs of the district, particularly on the east side of Gainesville, and then also capacity in the west, that really needed to be addressed on the front end of the referendum. And we kind of refer to those affectionately as the big four. So just to go through those projects quickly, the Metcalf redevelopment, the Bishop redevelopment with the associated Westwood Transition School, the Idlewild redevelopment, the Elementary School I, which is a new school. And we've also added the Oakview middle classroom building to address some of the capacity issues that we've seen in the Newberry, greater Newberry area. So here we are, we're just under 2 months away from kickoff. The big four projects are going to be kicking off in June. Based on the overall project cost estimates we have at this time, just over 110 million. Obviously, we have not to date accumulated enough funds in the sales tax to be able to fully fund those projects on the front end. We obviously feel like the impact of these projects is really, really important. So we've been working, I guess, the better part of the last year on financing options the district has. So that's kind of the reason for coming back today. Since we did kind of kick off the bonding process or lending process, if you will, there's obviously been some changes in the circumstance. The COVID-19 pandemic has obviously had an incredible impact on our economy locally, state, county, and globally, to be frank. So some of those circumstances have kind of changed a little bit on the revenue side. I mean, if you think about what people are purchasing at this point, it's primarily food, medicine, and online purchases. Those are all exempt from sales tax. And so there's definitely, some concern long-term and short-term of the impact. At this point, we don't know. And we should know in the coming months what that's going to look like for our district, in particular, the sales tax project list. A couple things I just wanted to mention that are kind of work in our favor. Our local economy, the biggest product is, or source of revenue is the universities and colleges and all their students that come up here and down from other states and spend their money. That's really the big driving force of our community in terms of economy. And, obviously we're hoping, praying that school's going to be back in session at UF and Santa Fe in fall. Of course, that's kind of up in the air at this point, but by the nature of having those students come back, doesn't make us recession proof, but it helps a lot. When you look at, coastal counties that you rely on tourism for so much of their revenues, that could be much more of a long-term impact for them. Whereas we're hoping, we can have football season and Gator Nationals, the students come back and we'll be able to recover more quickly than some counties. The other thing that works in our favor is, we have 10 years left on the referendum. And while we are going to see, without a doubt, at least on the short term, a precipitous drop in revenues, we do have a lot of time till the end of the referendum to maneuver around and look at our projects and kind of address it at that point. And then I just wanted to mention, we have basically two main sources of revenues for capital. We have the sales tax, which you guys are obviously very familiar with, and the 1.5 mil local millage levy. We do, in the next couple of years, have a few debt service issues rolling off. At this point, the statutory limit on lending or debt capacity for the 1.5 mil or local capital is at 75%. The last time I looked at it, our debt ratio was 28%. So there is ability, if we did get into issues in the latter portion of the sales tax cycle, if we did get into issues, we do have the ability to levy some additional, to generate some additional funds, being another COPS issue. It's also been a really fascinating study in interest rates. So we were sitting and having meetings in January with the team, and we have a team of, financial advisors, several attorneys and staff. And we were talking in January, and they kind of brought to my attention that at that time, it was the historic low of borrowing costs for public issuance. And of course, we may have jinxed ourselves just a touch. And of course, what we saw was starting in mid-March, when the social distancing really took foot. And then, of course, when the executive order came through, there was a great deal of volatility in the market. And I remember, looking at those daily reports and just seeing the graph go exponentially up. And I mean, essentially what happened, it's a simple economics play. We had people that wanted to borrow money, and the investors simply weren't there. So that drove the interest rates up. The really good news since then is the market has really started to calm down. It started first in California, and we're starting to see that much more locally. There's a couple bond issues, public offerings we're going to really be keeping a close eye on, because that's going to tell us in large term what we're going to be looking at for an interest rate. But it really has calmed down, and we're seeing the investors that really drive those prices enter the market again and feel more comfortable. And so we're basically, what this resolution does in a nutshell is it authorizes the superintendent, the board chair, and myself to execute, along with the industry professionals, execute a bond not exceeding $115 million. At this point, we're looking at a project cost of around $110 million. We're going to continue to work as we go through design with the design professionals and really hopefully get that number down. We do obviously want to keep in a margin of error so we don't have to come back to the board. And in terms of the timing, at this point, we're looking for the authorization, and then we'll go through depending on what funding mechanism, we'll go through the bond rating presentations and meet with Moody's and Standard & Poor's. And then if it's a public offering, we'll then look carefully at the timing of it along other deals that are going to be hitting the market to try to hit that sweet spot to get the best interest rate. It's another point I wanted to mention on this resolution. It's a little bit different probably than the standard issue in that you have basically two options for lending on a long-term basis for a COP deal. You have the public offered bond, which is what you tend to see on the larger deals. It's certainly a lot more work for staff and everyone, but it tends to yield the best and lowest interest rate and, of course, borrowing cost. So we're keeping an eye closely on that based on the market and what we've seen in just the last 2 weeks. It's looking very favorable. Another potential we have is a direct place bank loan. So we issued an RFP just to see with some of the larger banks like SunTrust, Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, and others to see, if we did want to not go the public offered route, go directly to the banks, what those interest rates would look like. They were favorable, but they were not as favorable as what the market looks like in terms of public issuance at this point. So included in this resolution is the authorization to go either route. So it includes direct placement or a public issuance. And, we're going to look at the market over the next couple of weeks, and whichever seems beneficial based on market conditions, that's kind of the direction that we're going to go.
All right, Mr. Rella, have you made the recommendation then?
I'm sorry, my computer froze up. Resolution number COP -20-07. The superintendent recommends the approval of COP 20-07 as presented.
So moved.
It's been moved by Mr. Hyatt,
Second.
seconded by Dr. Paulson. Mr. Moore, are there any public comments from citizens on this
We have not
item?
received any phone calls for this one, but let me check with Jackie Johnson to see if anyone has come live. Jackie?
requests?
I'm sorry, Jackie, I muted you after you unmuted yourself. Could you repeat
Oh.
that?
Yes, we have not had any requests.
Okay, thank you.
All right. How about discussion from the board? Would anyone like to speak?
I have a question for Mr. Rella.
Sure. Ms. Certain, go ahead.
Mr. Rella, I didn't ask you earlier. Thanks for the explanation, for going through that with us, and for answering my questions via email and by phone call this morning. But will you come back to the board or let us know which of these options is chosen when you decide, or you get advice on which one is the better option to take?
We certainly will. We'll keep the board informed. Obviously, ultimately, the interest rate we get and so forth is really important knowledge for you guys to have. In terms of approval, if we go the public offering route, there'll be no additional approval because you've authorized us to enter the purchase contract. But we'll certainly keep the board apprised of market conditions and anything going forward that we think is pertinent that you need to know.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Certain. Anyone else?
Yes, me, Mr. Roy.
Dr. Paulson, go ahead.
You know, you probably get sick of hearing me on this, but first of all, Alex, I thought it was, and I told you earlier, that was great reading, even beyond the cops, just the explanation of a lot of things in our finances that you explained very clearly. But I just want to go, what's really scary, and I remember I've been saying this for a long time, the required local effort. And then since 2016, this year it's going to go from 5.09, which is essentially 5.1, down to 3.733. If we still had that millage right now, that'd be $21 million more just for this year. And what really scares me is our funding formula, the FEFP and the minimum foundation before that, was built on property taxes. And with the reduction of the property taxes, it's relying more on sales tax. And you heard what Mr. Rella said about the sales tax. So I remember I've said that if we get a recession, this is what scares me more with what they were doing with the required local effort. And I thought I'd just say that one more time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Paulson. Anyone else like to speak? Well, I will just say that I greatly appreciate Mr. Rella keeping such a close eye on the interest rates and all the work that he and his staff have done to get this done. And it's also really good to hear that we're paying off some of our debt so that we have more capacity if we need it. So it's been moved and seconded. If there's no more discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Certain, aye.
Aye. I said aye.
Yes. Okay. All right. The motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Now we're at resolution number 20-09 for approving the referendum language to renew the 1 mil ad valorem millage for the November 2020 ballot. We turn it over to Mrs. Johnson, please.
Thank you, Ms. Roy. It's hard to believe that it's been nearly 4 years now since the 1 mil was last voted on, last approved by voters. That was a 77% approval rate we had from voters. And as you heard Mr. Rella say, we are facing some significant challenges when it comes to revenues in the coming year because of COVID and possibly beyond that. So I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that we will probably need this 1 mil as much or perhaps even more than we did the first year we asked voters to approve it back in 2008. You have a copy of the language that we are putting forward. Very, very minimal changes. We don't feel comfortable messing with success, especially when we consider how critical these revenues are going to be to us for the next 4 years. So at this point, the superintendent recommends that the school board adopt resolution number 20.9 or 20-09 as presented.
So move.
Moved by Mr. Hyatt,
Second.
seconded by, I guess that was Dr. Paulson. Mr. Moore, do we have any public comment on this first?
Sorry, Madam Chair. We have not received any phone calls on this item. We did not receive any emails on this, and unless Jackie has been told otherwise in the last 2 minutes, we do not have anyone live to speak on.
That's correct.
All right, thank you. Anyone from the board like to weigh in on this?
I'd like to say something, Madam Chair.
Yes, Ms.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, good, very good. Inasmuch that we've had such a great, I don't know if you would call it a great experience, but a learning experience from where we're working right now, especially with distance learning. Is there any way that we can put something maybe extra? Because I know we had to scramble to get devices for our students, and who knows what may happen in the future. And I'm just wondering if we would look at doing something additional in as much that we are experiencing all of the things that we are currently.
Okay, Dr. McNeely, anyone else like to speak?
I do. I have something, and I had been looking at the mill. I've worked with Mr. Rella, got some info from him, and I just kind of want to share a little bit of my thoughts. I kind of, what really made me kind of put together a few slides was after I saw the ballot language that was suggested, kind of the few tweaks in there. So I'm going to share my screen. I talked with Brian or Mr. Moore about this earlier, and let's see here. The computer's been freezing up, so let's see if it goes. Can you all see my screen? I can't see anything. It went black.
No.
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 In
Do you
fact,
want me-
your picture is kind of frozen too.
Ah.
There.
So this just came up. I'm not sure if you all can see it. Can you see?
Not yet.
Like me to share what you sent? Did you send it to me?
I did.
Okay, let me see if I can pull it up.
So I'll exit out because.
All right, let's see. Does that appear on people's screens now?
Yes,
Yeah.
it does.
Okay.
I don't see it, but I have the presentation. Are you at the second slide off of the cover?
I am now, yeah.
I'm not sure. I guess there's a delay in the, oh, there you go. Okay. Can everyone see that? Brian, would you, Mr. Moore, do you mind sharing that like full screen so it'll be a little bit easier for everyone to see?
Let's see if I can. Might have to go-
Like in presentation mode versus just, oh, well, I see what you did. You opened just the document. Okay. At any rate, I'll know, and I want to just preface this. I am in favor of the meal. I don't want this to be misconstrued and the narrative to be switched to say that certain is not in favor of the meal. But what I do want us to think of as a collective body and as an organization is to make sure that we're looking at funding and we're spending it in an equitable manner and to make sure that all are benefiting. So I had been, as a citizen, trying to get actual dollars spent and all of that. And Mr. Rell and I worked after I was elected. I got with him and explained to him what I was trying to do to try to compile some numbers. And just in the interest of time, I won't go through all of what I did, but for all of the available years of information that he could share with me on the mill since its inception, there were 2 years he couldn't give me, but from 2012 to 2019, there's been that slide there that shows by category what we spent on career technical, classroom technology, and I lost it. He lost
Oh,
it.
that's me. That was
Brian's
me.
got it, yeah.
I made the mistake.
Ah,
I see something. There.
okay. And so I just kind of wanted us to collectively look in to see how the money has been expended out. You can go down, Mr. Moore, and we can see, and the mill has been a real good funding source for us to be able to offer special programs and to not get cuts in arts and music and things of that nature. But as you can see there, the biggest chunk of the money goes to CTE, academic magnets, and special programming. And I just kind of want to point out, since we are really in our community and in our district, we're saying equity is important, is just to see that with the magnet programs, we spent, for the years that I had information, 7 years, we spent 32% of the money, or $33 million, on 12% of the student body population. And I'll just kind of bring up that there's an overrepresentation of one student body and an underrepresentation of others. And so I know we have the lottery where we're trying to increase minority student participation in certain programs, but that hasn't really moved the needle. So I think we have to kind of start looking at the decisions we make and how we'll fund programs and what things are offered. So we have the inequity that still exists, that Blacks are about 35% of our population, and they make up about 13% of the special programs. That's getting about a third of the taxing, fund for all of this period there. So, and as a whole, magnet students are about 3,600 students as of 17. That's what I had to be able to drop in there. I didn't worry about calling staff today, out of the 29,000. You can advance it, Mr. Moore. Thank you. And classroom technology, Dr. McNeely just mentioned that also about us, the pandemic bringing to front us having to do distance learning and offer, some students don't have devices in their home. And in our community, they've studied this and have noted that there is this great digital divide with devices. And then we have also the connectivity divide, meaning that there's certain areas of our district where there's not service provided, or folks don't have the funding to purchase, internet service. So it's really good. I'm not saying it was my idea. I mentioned that I had heard they did that in the mobile buses in Polk County. So I'm really glad that we have that here. Also, I've read and that they have those wireless routers on certain school buildings in certain counties where it allows access to be had outside of the smaller window. So it's good we have the bus, but I think we should think something a little long-term or more permanent, longer than a 3-hour window of trying to provide services to that, since if we have this. And I'm not sure if on the classroom technology, we could install those wireless routers out on the at school sites, so various sites. So I'm just kind of like dropping this as a hint so that we as a body can kind of start thinking as to how we'll use these funding. So it may be that we need to, in addition to classroom technology, whatever way of offering additional and being able to reach more of our students, because really distance learning may not be just for these last 9 weeks of school. It may extend. I'm hoping it doesn't, but this could be a reality for the next school year. You can advance it, Mr. Moore. Thank you. Up.
Oh,
Up.
sorry. This one?
Elementary music and art is the next slide, 4, I think it is. You're going the opposite way.
Right, yeah, so we did this one and now
Yeah.
this was the next one.
And on the classroom technology, I did not mention that. I don't know if going to one-to-one device per student. I mean, I know we have lots of laptops, and we have the not laptops, but desktops in our computer labs are equipped because of all the end of year testing, end of course testing and things of that nature. But wondering if, as Dr. McNeely said, we may move to looking at having more devices that are portable versus desktops. I know I've spoken with Mr. Shakar, and he says that he recommended for one of the grantees for the Children's Trust if they purchase desktops because they're more durable. But in a situation like we have now for students that may not have devices, we don't really want to be where we're putting those students at even more of a disadvantage because our learning is not in a brick and mortar building. They're having to do it at home. So, and I've read those Child One grants and various grants, and I always see laptop purchases on there. And I think I even ran that by a question with Mr. Rella, wondering why they purchased so many laptops with Title I funds when we had 1 mil, but as it all worked out, it seems like those that came in handy that we had those and they're able to be issued out during this crisis time there. So that we may want to really, as a body and the folks who know a little bit more about technology than I do, look at going to purchasing more units that can be issued out if we end up in a situation like this in the future. So thank you. And our elementary music and art, I pointed this out here. We spend a good bit on elementary music and art every year. And as a total for the past 7 years, it's number 3 in the category. And I noticed in the language here that the elementary was dropped off of in the revision that's been offered up. And so I just kind of wanted to point that out. But I also want to make the point that I'm hoping that all of our students, especially our younger students that are remedial, and we have a lot of students of color who are not doing well, and I'm really concerned about them, that when they come back to school and a brick and mortar, that they don't lose their art and music to pull out help, you know, when they're getting additional support, academic support. So especially since we're paying this tax to be able to do that, and it's consuming a large amount. So we're hoping that there's something in there, and as well, same thing with the middle school students, that they have the intensive reading so they don't get to have, you know, an elective in art or course or band or something like that. Okay. Forward. And I noticed also that guidance counselors was revised to be counseling services. And this is one last year during budget that I suggested that I know we have the staffing report and that we're doing that, but I'm wondering if there's any way or want to suggest that we offer more services and increase the level in high school so that we can have career counseling and college advising, you know, and in situations where we have a lot of English language learners, students with disabilities, disadvantaged students, low-income students, that we have more counselors on staff, more guidance counselors or counseling services are on staff. I mean, and not just go by the staffing report, since we have that. And I'm sensitive. I know all of this costs money, but as of, you know, how money is being spent by our government now is just kind of, I'm more convinced now that people fund and do what's important to them. So if we say this is important to all of our students being successful, I think we would make this a priority, you know, and strengthening the wraparound services, because that seems to be a need. We hear in visiting the DA schools as often as I have from the start of the year until before spring break. That seems to be kind of a theme that we hear a lot of those visits. So thank you. Band and chorus don't get what I thought they were getting. And when I started looking at this, it was a kind of a paltry amount. So middle school band got a lot more than high school band, it seems like, and middle and high school chorus only got 1% of the funding. So that's kind of self-explanatory. Now I see why the band parents raise so much money. They always hawk us down. I don't know about y'all, but we see that a lot. So, and finally, just some recommendations I'd like for us to really consider. I know there's been some tweaking of the language, and I'd like to ask a couple questions to make sure that school counselors and more wraparound services will be covered by the revision in the language that's been offered up, and that the increase in strength of the wireless internet at the schools and more hotspots for the children, our students and teachers, will be covered by, you know, our existing language. And if not, I'd like to try to offer a revision to the language, if not, and that we can get to that one-to-one, you know, device for students and teachers, you know, as I said earlier, especially the mobile devices. So we can fund that out of the meal versus the school budget. So, and lastly, I'm not sure if anyone, and I only caught this because, like I said, I had read the mill language often, and I went back and pulled the previous ballots from the supervised election and just compared the two. And that's really how I saw that there was something different. You know, as I said, the elementary was dropped from before the music and art and drama was added, and the K through 12 school library programs, K through 12 was dropped from there, as well as from in front of guidance. And instead of guidance, it's revised. So I'm not sure if those revisions, and I'm not sure who can answer the questions about the counseling services, what that entails or not. So
Okay.
And there's someone waiting in the room.
Yes, Mrs.
Ms. Clark, I don't know. Are you finished, Mrs. Certain?
I am. Like I said, I'm not sure who would answer those questions, and I do I'd like to hear the answer to that before I proceed. I will have something else based on the answer to those questions. So.
Mrs. Roy, I was going to ask you, we do have one person who has called in. I don't know if you want to go to them first or wait until after we've completed Ms. Certain's discussion and answers.
Well, let's go to, since citizen comment was first anyway, let's go to citizen comment if you don't mind.
We'll keep our fingers crossed that this is going to work. I should have just now admitted Karen Alford. I might need to unmute her. Let me find. Nope. Ms. Alford, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, you are on for citizen input on the 1 mil ballot language.
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity. I also wanted to thank Ms. Sarton for sharing that information, for taking the time to present the information and analyze it in a way that we can gain more insight. And I just wondered if that document will be made available on your website for public viewing.
I mean, it will be made part of the meeting minutes, so you'll be able to get it from the superintendent's office. I don't know what the minutes usually don't come back for a couple of weeks, but if you need it earlier, I would just call 955-7300 and ask for either the superintendent's office or the staff attorney's office. You can also get it from my office.
Do I have this?
Okay, yeah, that's what I,
Because we can send it.
the
later.
minutes usually are delayed, so we can call in. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I think Mrs. Clark had some.
Sure, Ms. Certain, if you can send that electronically to me, then we can get that emailed out to people when they request it.
I sent it to Ms. Peck.
I have it.
Okay, okay. So to answer some of the questions with the change in the language, the title of school guidance counselor is what we've been told is an antiquated term. They're now designated as school counselors. And so that was the sole change in language there. The K-12, what you found was you had elementary music and art programs, but that didn't necessarily cover up middle and high school music and art programs at that time. And then so you had some that said elementary and some that said K-12. So when you remove those, the K-12, you're still looking at everything, but it cleans up the ballot language so it can be used K through 12 for music and art, the library programs and those types of things. The drama piece came about, and we actually had this situation happen at 2 schools over the past couple of years where a teacher who's very highly qualified might be certified in drama and is teaching like a musical theater class. So is that music or is that drama or is it both? And so with that being a performing art, and we do have multiple schools that do that type of situation where they're doing the musicals and such under the auspices of drama, but it's really a music program. And so that would resolve that for our high schools that they're doing that. And a lot of it has to do with the actual teacher certification. But since it is a performing arts designation anyway, so it is considered performing arts. So the K-12 and the elementary verbiage was to kind of clear up some of that confusion, because you have elementary in some and K-12 in the other, and then nothing on some of them. So it kind of cleared it up and made it all similar in that regard. On a couple of the slides were there, I think, some questions or what we needed to answer, just to provide some additional information. It may not necessarily answer the question today, but it might offer some additional information. Yes, we are very thankful to have those Title I computers in those Title I schools, but it's also important for us to note that most of our laptops that have gone to our secondary students are not paid at all with Title I. Those were actually paid for out of the 1 mil as part of our eSchool labs. We dismantled our eSchool labs, which are all done on laptop. And those were some of the first computers that were given out. So the computers, not only 1 mil, but also some technology funds that aren't necessarily 1 mil generated, but technology funds. So that our computers have come from a variety of sources as we've worked through that process. I'm sorry, I've got the handouts in a different order than what, so I just want to make sure I get all of them correct. The elementary students, there was some conversations back with Dr. Roberts with students missing the arts for remediation. And for the last 3 years, we have specifically instructed principals that they are not missing the arts for remediation. I did check with, I just sent a message to curriculum to say, hey, what do you know about this? We do have a couple of schools where they're missing the one of their PEs. You know, we've got teacher-led PE and then PE teacher PE at the elementary schools. But that's only being done with parent permission. But so if someone's aware where a child is being pulled from elementary music or art for remediation, we need to know that, because that we have specifically directed principals that they should not be doing that. Sorry, let me get back to my notes here. One thing also to consider as part of the dollars, as I was just looking through, where we have our total magnet enrollment of 3621, and that includes, I'm assuming, the academic CTE, both magnets. We have a total of right around 5,000 students that are enrolled in at least one CTE course. So when we say like a CTE magnet program, like the Fire Academy at Lofton, that's a full 4-credit program to complete. But we also fund the courses and things that are not a full 4-year program. They might be a standalone CTE course like digital design. Some of those things also fall under those CTE courses. So that also would explain a higher dollar amount there. CTE courses by nature are more expensive to operate just because of the equipment and stuff that they need. But there are students who participate even in a single course that is not reflected as a magnet program because it's offered at their home school for one course. So wanted to make sure you have that information. And then really on the one-to-one piece, you know, there are some districts that are doing that. When we look at our district, and also recognizing that beginning with this 1 mil, if approved again, that beginning in July of 21, the charter schools will also have their portion of a proportionate share of any local tax revenue like that. So we will have to allocate a proportionate share to our charter schools, which will impact the dollar amount that we will then be able to spend. But in looking at those mobile devices, if you're looking at a Chromebook, an inexpensive device, which a lot of districts are giving out Chromebooks, the life usage of those are generally 2 to 3 years, whereas we are refreshing every 5 years our desktops and other laptops. 2 to 3 years. They're inexpensive, but they do have to be replaced pretty frequently. If we're looking at purchasing one for every student in the district, you're looking at about $8.8 to $9 million to do that. So obviously if that was the board's direction, that may have to be a phase-in approach, because if you take 9 million out of 1 year's worth, you can't fund everything that's being funded out of the 1 mil on a standalone year. And then even looking at mobile hotspots, using the rate that we pay for government use versus what we would pay to provide for a home, you're looking at about $40 a month. Is what UMA has, I've asked him that question multiple times over the past couple of weeks. So if you're looking at that for 29,000 students, you're looking at just over $1 million a year for internet accessibility for our students. And, you know, that digital divide, I think is an issue that, you know, the school district cannot solve alone. You know, that's obviously a much bigger issue for the entire Alachua County because we still have areas that are not, you know, don't have adequate access. Even if you have some access, it's not enough to run some of these programs, educational softwares and the things that students need to be able to do. You know, you need a higher speed to do that. And some of our areas have, you know, one step above dial-up, and that makes it very frustrating. I don't have high-speed internet where I live, and I live in a subdivision in the middle of Gainesville. But, you know, just they haven't gotten that high speed to us just yet. So obviously those are things we would need to kind of talk through and look as to how as a district we can, you know, partner to help that internet issue and the connectivity divide, because we know we've got Cox and AT&T that have offered assistance and free or very low cost internet services, but that doesn't even reach the entire county either. So, but again, just wanted to give that feedback on the dollar amounts there. And the only other one that I had in my notes, in looking at counselors, I know we are having a difficult time with getting certified counselors. That is something, obviously, with all teachers, we continue to try and recruit, retain the very best talent in Alachua County. But we are, there is, if you're talking about a shortage area, certified, highly qualified school counselors is one of those areas. So just something to maintain, that even if we were to allocate the resource, because generally we don't pay for a full time as we budget it now. If someone is a counselor in the school, we don't have 100% of their salary coded to the 1 mil. It's generally 1/2 of their salary coded to the 1 mil. But it's a matter of, can we certainly find those people? And, we want to make sure we have plenty of counselors, but we also want to make sure we find highly qualified people as well to fill those positions. So other than that, I think that was it. I was just trying to go through all the handouts to make sure I made notes as Ms. Certain was going along. So I think that was all the information I could provide right now.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. That was really extensive. Mrs. Johnson, would you like to add anything to that, or was that sufficient?
No, ma'am, that pretty much covers it.
Madam
Okay.
Chair.
Yes, sir.
Okay, are you recognizing me?
Yes, I will.
Okay, thank you very much. I wanted to say I really appreciate the information and work put in by Ms. Certain, and I'm going to ask when I'm done if the superintendent and assistant superintendent Rella could correct me if any of my understanding is not there. I believe that the vast majority of 1 mil funding is for salaries and benefits, and so I think that when we start looking at other things to add, what Tallahassee does is they keep adding things without funding them. I think if we start adding things for something that's worked very well for us over 12 years, what positions are we going to eliminate? Who's not going to get their music teacher or their art teacher or their librarian? And these are things that I think there's so many worthy ideas and worthy investments, but the 1 mil has been specifically for the areas mentioned. And again, the support by our community is outstanding. 77% the last election. I think with the current environment, it's we can't ever assume anything. I believe we have a proven product, and I'd like to leave it as proposed. And I do appreciate the superintendent explaining the very small changes in ballot language. Also, when you ride in the county, of course, right now we're supposed to be staying at home. So, but if you are coming into Alachua County and you see the sign that says Alachua County, where nature and culture meet, and we have in our district some of the finest art programs, music programs, drama programs, and this is something we're all proud of. All 5 board members are very proud of those, as is the superintendent. We came into a situation, and I was teaching at Duval at that time, when we had some positions that district-wide that were reduced. And through the 1 Mill and through groups support like Friends of Elementary Arts, we've actually flourished with that. And so I think that's something that to me, I'm committed to continuing. And so also, I appreciate Ms. Certain pointing out the importance of not pulling children out, to make sure that all children get their art and their music. And I think the superintendent has underlined that that's happening. And I also appreciate her pointing out the paltry funding for art, for bands. I know there'll be some band directors that are ready to write her a thank you note for that. And but I, as much as we'd all like it to be more, and it is a little more this past year, we can't fund it all. We can't fund everything. And so when we have our as has been pointed out by Mr. Rella, that we have a somewhat of an uncertain future with funding. I again, just saying we're going to add this and this, I think is I don't think it's something we is prudent to do at this point. Now, I will commit absolutely to working however we can with our governmental partners and seeing and certainly with our legislative delegation, with our congressman, to see where funding is available, what can we do to expand internet access. I know that Commissioner Hutchinson, in his proposal, that's one of the big commitments that he would like to work on. So I'm not saying let's ignore this, but as far as the 1 Mill, I would like to see it stay the way it is. Now,
Can I clarify something?
can I ask, and then I'm going to be done, and that, Mr. Rella, is that correct as far as the bulk of the money being for salaries?
Right. So we fund around 270 FT positions. I think over 300 actual people positions, because some of them are half mill, half general. But I just did some really quick math, and it's about 85% salaries at this point.
So that's thank you. That's what I thought. And so again, when we start, we look at the cut for charter schools. We look at the uncertainty of financial situation, and if we're going to be honest, we have to say what positions are going to be cut if we add more things to this 1 Mill. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you,
Madam
Mr.
Chair.
Hyatt. I think Ms. Certain wanted to say something.
I wanted to clarify, I wanted you to come back after Superintendent Clark, but I wasn't asking to add anything. I'm asking that we fund with the view on equity. If we're saying we want to meet the need, I'm not asking us to add anything else. If we know that connectivity is an issue, and I know we can't solve the whole problem, but you don't have to buy 29,000 laptops because you haven't issued 29,000 laptops during this pandemic. We know there's a certain sector of our population that doesn't have a device in their home and they don't have connectivity, not just because they don't live in an area where they are. So it's not 29,000 we would have to provide internet service to in their homes and 29,000 devices. I'm asking that we look to with an eye towards equity. We're bouncing that around in our community strongly in the district as well as in our community. So when I say that, so we want to try to give more and fund things that would help our neediest students. That's all I'm asking, that in the classroom technology, if that language permits us to be able to have devices and to which it does, but hopefully they will be portable where if this happens again, where they would have an access to a unit outside of school hours, and that they would have internet access. And one may say that's not the school's responsibility to provide internet access in someone's home, but if we're trying to say we're trying to create a level playing field through the educational arena, and we have this funding source, I think it would be imprudent of us not to look at doing what we could to help our neediest students. It's like we went to the voters and asked them to vote for this taxing structure because Tallahassee we had unfunded mandates. Well, we have this funding mechanism now, and if we wouldn't use it to help our neediest students, those who, you know, as I said, as our neediest, if we won't reallocate some funding some kind of way to be able to do that, I think that would just be not the best decision on our part. I think that would just not be good. So I'm not asking for us to dump a whole lot more in there. I understand dollars and cents, trust me. I'm just asking that we reprioritize some of what we spend and how we spend it. That, you know, let that be the focus. We'll afford what we want to afford. That's for sure.
Madam Chairman.
Oh, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Dr. McNeely.
Thank you, Mrs. Roy. To both of my colleagues, I agree with both of you. However, during this time, I won't say many, I will say a couple of people from the university, they picked up the phone and called and said, "What do you need?" And I immediately suggested that they speak with Mr. Shankua to find out what are our needs when it comes to technology. I am sure that because of the 77% vote that we did receive from the community, I am convinced by a couple of conversations and emails that I've received, more people want to do a little bit more with helping in what we're talking about right now. I think Mrs. Clark may have received, I don't know if she did, get some calls from some citizens, especially professors over at UF. We've talked about taking old equipment and then expect our people to repair it or fix it. And that's not doable either. I'm talking about new technology. And if Santa Fe, the UF, and they want to help, or the broader community wants to dig deep down in their pockets and give more, I think we need to accept it. So I'm hoping that any offers that come through, that we will certainly put those funds toward what Ms. Certain has shared tonight with where we are lacking. No, we cannot give 29,000 devices out. I get that. But we can certainly improve what we have and be on solid ground if we have to continue with distance learning, which is a high possibility. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Dr. McNeely.
Roy?
Yes, Dr. Paulson.
Yeah, first of all, Ms. Certain, thank you very much. You did a lot of work and was very
Yes, you
informative.
did.
And then the CTE were 3,600 students. Thank you to the superintendent, because I remember when we looked at this a couple of years ago, 33% of our students that are out that could take CTE courses were taking at least one course. It might even be higher now. You got to remember, it's not all 29,000 students. We got to eliminate our elementary school students. So I thought, thank you very much, Mrs. Clark. Mr. Hyatt, I think you should get kudos for this language change. Well, the first thing I thought about is how you got, I think, chorus into the middle schools. And I think you should be complimented for that. And so I think that's something need to be said. And Mr. Hyatt, I wasn't even, but to listen to what your explanation was a very informative and very convincing explanation. I just want to compliment you on that too. That was very informative too. You and Mr. Rella, and Mrs. Roy and I, we went through the last recession.
Can't hear him.
Mrs. Roy and I
Speak
went.
up a little bit. I'm
I know,
sorry.
everybody tells me that. I thought I was William Jennings Bryan, but I guess I'm wrong. Um, uh, yeah, we went through the last recession. This mill got us through the recession, got us through. And I think we're gonna have to look at a lot of tough decisions. We don't know what they are because we don't know what's coming up. So we'll have to see it. But Mr. Hyatt, you were very convincing, and it was an excellent presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Paulson. Anyone else like to speak?
Mrs. Roy, if I may.
Sure.
Dr. McNeely mentioned the donations. Dr. McNeely, I haven't really spoken with any professors as of yet, but we have had some very supportive groups come and ask us, what do we need? And the first thing we've talked about is the connectivity. Because right now we still have 1,000 devices that we can issue if needed. But a lot of our families said, I don't have a way to access the internet, so a device doesn't really do me any good, which is true. If you don't have the internet, that doesn't really help. And so what we've said is absolutely, that the connectivity is a big thing. But as Dr. McNeely mentioned with the devices, we've had groups and folks want to donate devices to individual schools and districts before. However, where we are right now with technology, and you've got to be able to access Windows 10 to be able to access our instructional materials and things. It's very difficult for us to take donations of anything that can't support Windows 10 because we really can't use it, and then we have to pay to recycle it and to dispose of it. Any donations that we could potentially take that are newer that could meet that system requirement of the Windows 10, the chamber has graciously offered. There's a local business technology firm who's offered to basically deprogram the device and return it to its factory settings. So if we get someone that says, hey, I have a 6-month-old iPad I'd like to donate, while our folks has been really working on our computers to get them ready to go out into homes versus into a school, that is half the battle, is making sure that everything is wiped off of it that the previous user had on their programs and whatnot. So we've actually, that's been a big help with the chamber stepping in to fill that void. And then the Community Foundation has reached out. They're working on a funding drive and structure to help families during this process, and the connectivity and devices could potentially be a part of that as well. So that's important because even after we get through this, it's important for students to have devices to be able to work on. As we do with all of our technology, we've really used a blended approach for technology. So while a lot of our Title I schools have done that, because we can't spend everything on personnel necessarily, and even if we have had positions, we may not have been able to fill them. But they have spent that on technology over the years to be able to have classroom sets of laptops and things of that sort. And then we've also been able to use the 1 mil and also digital classroom funds that are coming from DOE. So we've really been able to use a blended approach. So there's no reason with the language that we've proposed that we couldn't use that money for devices. I think we just have to look at, as has been mentioned, what does this pandemic do to those revenues that would potentially be coming in? What does the charter school proportionate share look like? And then is there a way to access what we have to be able to utilize those devices in this way? One thing that will be an immediate need for us, though, is being able to potentially replace these devices that we've issued. We've already had situations where devices have been dropped, broken, screens cracked already, and we're in week 4. Actually, the first one came on day 2. So the student was issued device on day 1, and then we had an iPad that was broken by day 2. So we are going to have to replace some devices for the schools because we want them to have what they've loaned out to use when the school year begins again. So we are going to have to take a look at that as part of the process. So again, I don't think that there's anything in the language that would preclude that. But I think we've got to work on the internet as we've all talked about as part of a more unified effort with our city and county leaders. But one thing I think that we can do, and if Ms. Roy, if I may, ask Jackie Johnson to speak about the E-rate funds that we use for our internet access. That's what we pay for our internet access with, but we're not allowed to use those funds to pay for access in the home. So Jackie, is there something, we discussed that today.
Yes, that is correct. The E-rate, the federal government's E-rate program essentially is like a 90% discount on broadband services. But currently, the feds do not allow you to use E-rate, the E-rate program, for at-home internet service. Now, there is some movement, especially in light of the COVID pandemic. There is a lot of lobbying, and there is a lot more discussion happening at the federal level to allow that, because my understanding is that right now there is federal E-rate money that's sitting there that could be used, but if not for that particular limitation. So certainly that's something that we're following, and we hope that that will be a change that the federal government makes to allow for the use of the E-rate system for at home, and that would, you know, significantly reduce the cost of providing internet access at home. On another topic, I do also want to raise the issue, as you will see, and as it has been since 2008, we do have language in the $1 million ballot that it will be used to fund school nurses. Up until now, we haven't had to use it for that purpose. But we've always left it in there because we understand that both the Medicaid funding and the state funding that we use to fund some of our school nurses through the health department, that's a year-by-year thing. And that could certainly be the case this year with the current, or with the expected economic climate. So if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Rella, if we were to try to fund school nurses, if it were to become necessary to fund school nurses out of the $1 million, that would be somewhere in the neighborhood, I think I remember somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 million a year.
Are you waiting for Mr. Rella to?
Yeah, if Mr. Rella is still available, but if I'm not mistaken, but you know, we certainly hope that doesn't happen. It hasn't happened yet, but that's just something to keep in mind, is that right now we haven't had to spend any money on the school nurses, but we leave that in the ballot language just in case that funding should be reduced or eliminated altogether.
So that you're absolutely right, Jackie. We leave that in there just in case. I mean, Medicaid funding's been a pretty hot topic in a political football for the last at least 10 years. We do put the ballot language, put the nurses in the ballot language just in case, because we know those services are obviously very essential. And if we lose, you know, our funding for Medicaid, you know, over $1 million, it would be significant.
Thank you, Mr. Rella, and thank you, Mrs. Johnson. Anyone else?
I did for the superintendent. I'm not sure. Superintendent Clark, for students, do we have a number of students who we've had contact with or no contact with, you know, like at all the levels, or either by like internet or them getting a packet? Do we have a count of those students, and as well as the number of students that we figure that don't have access to internet?
Right. So the number of students doing work in print versus online, that's what I talked about in my very beginning update. Right. We wanted to get through the Wi-Fi buses because we distributed 300 devices since we made that announcement last week. So I talked with the principals yesterday, and we're going to start collecting that information at the end of this week, but it's going to require a teacher by teacher survey to see how many of their students are accessing online versus that they're still having to create materials for an in-print version. So as soon as we get that information, we'll get that to the board. As for those that don't have access, that's a little harder to be as specific with, because one of the answers we want, if a child is still accessing via paper materials, why is that? Is that because they really just want to do it on paper, or is it because they don't have internet access? Because we have some students that just don't learn well online. And so they, you know, will print the math problems, take a picture of it on their phones and email it to their teacher. They just don't want to have to do the problem online and things of that sort. But when we had the survey that we sent out right before the break, we had, Jackie, do you remember how many responded to that survey?
Yes.
60,000?
Yes, we had about a 60% response rate to the survey that we sent out. I believe it was the week before spring break well, the first week of the extended spring break, we got about a 60% return rate, which was pretty good. Those that responded, we had 18, I believe it was 18, a little bit over 1,800 folks who said that they did not have access to high-speed internet. But of course, we have to assume that of the 40% that didn't respond, a good chunk of them don't have access to high-speed internet either.
Sure. So
Thank you.
that's where we are, that's where we are right now. But again, as we get more and more information on individual students that are coming from the schools, that may help us even have a better grasp on that. But when we are finding pockets that really don't have that quality internet accessibility, there may be families that are buying like the hotspots through their cell phone provider that's giving them better internet than if they were to get like the Windstream or whatever the, smaller providers are out in some of our areas.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. Anyone else on the board like to weigh in on this? Well, I will say that I really appreciate Mrs. Certan's work on this, which is extensive and really well thought out. Also, the comments made by other board members. I think that, time is of the essence on this as well. As I heard earlier when I discussed this with the superintendent and Mrs. Johnson. So we have had a discussion and a recommendation. So is there a motion to approve this resolution number 20-09?
There's already been a motion, Mrs. Roy.
Has there? Okay, I thought we were waiting for the,
A long time ago.
okay.
Got a motion in a second.
Forgotten, I guess. Okay. All right, then. If there's no more discussion, all in favor then?
Aye.
Aye. Is that everyone? I think, yes. The motion passes 5-0. Thank you, everyone. We are now at citizen input. Mr. Moore, do we have any emails? I think you said we got some emails. Is that right?
Yes, Madam Chair. There are 3 emails. I'm going to read 2 in full and 1 shortly edited, just so that it stays under 3 minutes. As I mentioned, I think at the beginning of the meeting, the part I'm editing out, I'm taking the liberty as a fellow Cambridge parent to cut out the part that she wrote about Cambridge students. And we do have 1 person on the line on hold. I will defer to you if you want to go ahead and let somebody speak on the phone first, so that they don't have to wait and listen to me.
Sure,
Well,
that's
they're not
fine.
listening to me, they're listening to hold music that repeats about every 15 seconds. So,
Well, let's let them go first then.
okay, so this is going to be Julie Crosby, and let's see if this works. Ms. Crosby? Oh, let's see, I need to unmute her. There she is. Ms. Crosby, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, you are on for citizen input. I don't know if you heard the part earlier when you get to 2.5 minutes, I'm going to ding a little bell just to give you a warning that you're getting close.
Right. Okay, first I want to thank Member Certain for her presentation. That was really helpful and the kind of thing I would like to see more of. She did exhaustive work there, and I just, that was transparency like I appreciate from the folks I vote for. This is the 1 mil is an issue of equity, and I appreciate that she said that. I did not get to comment during that time because I didn't call in at the right time. But I wanted to just speak to that point that I took her point well, it was well said, and I appreciate her saying it. I appreciate that Ms. Clark said that the digital divide is not something that the district can solve on its own. And that is a well said point as well. And I want to encourage the board to keep addressing the digital divide
and the district to address it by collaboration. Collaborate with others in the community, such as Santa Fe, UF, and find others that want to reach out and help with this issue, because this is going to be returned to again and again with this virus. And this is no different than paper and pencil if these students didn't have it. They're going to have to need it, and we're going to have to find a way to solve it together with others. Go back to the Friendship 7, get with them, have a summit, and make it happen. So collaborate on it. And to Member Hyatt's point, salaries and chorus and band. We're in a situation where you can't even gather. How are we going to have chorus? How are we going to have band? Maybe we need, and I love chorus and band. I'm band parent here, but we cannot, I was a band parent, not currently, thank God, no more candle selling for me. But we need to be looking at spending the money in more practical areas now. Sad to say, look at where the money could be spent more wisely for the future and what's real now. This is a time for leadership in what areas that we really need. So I'm sorry to have to say that, but that's just where we're really at now. And those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Crosby. Anyone else? Mr. Moore, do we have anybody in the waiting room?
No, ma'am, we do not. So I will read the 3 emails that we received. And so the first one is from Karen Alford, who I think, did she call earlier? She actually had a couple questions. One was with respect to the agenda, which we fixed, but I'll read her entire email. Number 1, we have received very minimal information regarding the success rate of virtual classroom participation. Is it possible to get an update on the number of students unable to participate in school classes via the virtual classroom? What is the plan to make contact with these families to get the students in this category on track with other students? Number 2, and this is with respect to the agenda, there's a consent agenda item regarding gifted endorsement, add-on program renewal. Is it possible or permitted access to view the reference document attachments? There was a problem with the link that we had to fix with respect to that comment. The next citizen input we received was from Ms. Carly Simon. And I will try not to read too fast, but it is close to 3 minutes when I practiced. So Superintendent Clark and Alachua School Board members, I'm a parent of 3 children in the Alachua County school system. I have 1 at each school level, elementary, middle, and high. The adjustment to online delivery has been a challenge. Many of the district's families are working very hard to manage this new format, as I'm sure so are all the educators in our district. I applaud the teachers of ACSD and their efforts. I cannot imagine the time and money they have dedicated to educating our children in an online setting almost overnight, while also managing the collective strain of living through this pandemic. I would like to ask about the grace and compassion grading policy. I appreciate the expectation shared with the district's teachers, but I also find the lack of specificity very concerning. This language is subject to interpretation. In my observation as a parent working closely with my children in their online classrooms, it is very clear that each teacher is defining grace and compassion in their own way. There is a wide spectrum of classwork assigned, grading expectations, delivery of content, etc. As I said, I have 3 children in school. Our family is collectively working with approximately 20 educators and administrators. The logistics alone are enormous. Excuse me. The reason I am most concerned is I have a junior in high school. His GPA is very important for his high school experience, as well as his college admission decisions, scholarships, and potential grants. I believe district families and educators deserve additional guidance and details associated with grace and compassion. There are enormous financial implications in the grading policy, most specifically for families of high school students. Furthermore, I want to point out my concern associated with grading and equity. I am well aware that my family is very privileged in this COVID-19 experience. We are not suffering financial constraints associated with layoffs. We are not in a profession that is considered essential and working in this health-threatening environment. So far, our family is healthy. I have an education background, specifically teaching high school mathematics. Helping my son in algebra is something that I'm very able to do. All 3 of my children have individual computers and we have excellent internet streaming. Yet we are still struggling. This has been hard on us, all of us. I worry about them academically and socially, emotionally. There is a fine line to walk to help push my children forward in school without breaking their spirit. They haven't seen their friends in over a month. They haven't left our home in over a month. This pandemic situation is incomprehensible for all of us. I can only imagine how this transition is weighing on families managing financial insecurity, full-time working parents outside the home or at home, limited technological options or skill sets, health concerns, and so much more. Grace and compassion needs to be defined, specifically from the perspective that families are managing the pandemic in very disproportionate ways. Equity must be included in the grace and compassion grading policy. I'm asking the board and superintendent to help with this concern. We parents are worried for our children and for the future. We need some clarity and specificity. We do need grace and compassion, but we need to know what that really means from the district. Thank you for your time and consideration. And then I have a third one, but we did get another caller. So again, rather than make them listen to that horrible hold music, I will find out who it is. Janelle Alexander. So let me see if I can bring Ms. Alexander in. Ms. Alexander, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, Ms. Alexander, you're going to be on with the board now for 3 minutes for citizen input. I just wanted to warn you, when it gets to about 30 seconds left, I'm going to ring a little bell. It's going to sound like that, just to give you a heads up.
Okay.
And you're on now.
Okay, no
Thank you.
problem. Thank you. Hi, my name is Janelle Alexander, and I just wanted to comment to thank the board for the opportunity not only to watch the meeting in an online capacity, but to have the opportunity as a working parent with 4 small children at home, teleworking and distance learning, to be able to provide input and feedback in real time with the board, I think is a significant advantage that we now have in light of the pandemic. And I just want to offer some parental feedback and encouragement that this opportunity for this level of dialogue be continued even after we recover from the current situation. It is much more feasible for parents who are very involved with their children's education. And so I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity. And I hope that this is one method of communication that can continue once we make it through this difficult time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Alexander. Very good suggestion. All right,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Moore. You want to read the other email that you have?
Yes, Madam Chair. This comes from Florida Bridgewater Alford. And again, I apologize. I did cut out the minutes, and what you got sent is the complete email. But just to make sure I read as much of it as I could, but still keep it within the 3 minutes. So I skipped the little intro, and then I say, while each resident across the county, state, and country has had to make devastating decisions for their families due to the fatal impact of COVID-19 virus, I had hoped that our school system would have been better prepared. Most of the teachers who are on staff have at least 2 degrees or possess reams of certifications, an indicator of the knowledge they purportedly bring to their instruction. However, we are 4 weeks in, and I have learned that there are teachers who are still struggling to set up a Google Classroom or have not put in place an interactive method to teach their students. Then the teachers are piling on lesson after lesson after a semblance of or proper demonstration of teaching the lesson. Without a semblance of or proper demonstration of teaching the lesson. I realized that hurriedly placing hundreds of lessons online in 2 weeks was a challenge, but I must applaud the UF faculty for shifting 5,000 courses online in days, not weeks. Albeit a team of IT professionals were available to assist, but our Alachua County school system lags. Frankly, I thought our Alachua County schools leadership would be better equipped. Yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it's challenging. Yes, it's selfless. And yes, it's rigorous. But our district asks our students to stretch in and out of the classroom on multiple occasions. Recently, I read a complaint from a teacher to their students just last week before that instructor went to play golf. Disappointing and a bit frustrating. Our students may be dealing with loneliness, depression, isolation, and anxiety, yet I was disheartened to learn that a few of our teachers may not fully grasp that reality. The essays that our students are submitting bear that fact, even as I prepare this note, unfortunately. On Friday, the schools just announced free Wi-Fi provided on a bus. It's a welcome addition, but why did it take 4 weeks to secure? Also, not to mention the teachers have essentially piled on with deadlines since the first day back from spring break when this information was sorely needed. Are you not evaluating other districts as a best practice of being successful with outreach and ensuring that our most vulnerable students are receiving the needed technology? Then you have asked parents to travel to the schools to pick up packets for their child if they don't have Wi-Fi or the supportive technology equipment. What if the parent is not able to travel to the school due to employment, unreliable transportation, or they can't leave young children at home? How about using the lunch buses as a one-stop shop for parents where they can pick up packets and their child's meals? Or have you offered to mail the packages to the homes? I'm sure these options were considered. This is where I skip a little bit about the Cambridge program. Lastly, I'm also thinking about our graduating seniors. I'm hopeful that you and your colleagues will plan a graduation ceremony that is safe and celebrates each student. For some of our students, this could be the last graduation ceremony they may experience. Let's do our very best to ensure it is memorable, joyful, and commemorates their individual achievement while adhering to the standards set forth by our public health officials, even if it means sitting 6 feet apart. I recognize there is much to consider in this letter, but I'm sure you agree that every student deserves your attention. The only response I need is action to address these concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore, and thank you, Mrs. Bridgewater Alford. I guess there's no more citizen comment. So we will go to board member superintendent requests, and the floor is open. If anyone would like to.
Mrs. Roy, I see Dr. Paulson's light on.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dr. Paulson.
Yeah, I had a parent call me and maybe something's in the works and maybe I missed it, but can we get Cox maybe to give us some free time on their TV and work with us that where we could get things out, maybe certain subjects or whatever. If we have some TV time, some of these people don't have internet, at least they might have a TV and be able to see it on TV in this time of our, all this, with the situation we're in. Just a suggestion. It came from one of the citizens in our school district, and I hope you consider it.
Thank you, Dr. Paulson. Mrs. Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can speak to that. That was actually a suggestion brought by another board member as well. We actually are working right now with the Cade Museum to bring some STEM lessons in by grade level. They've been helping us kind of intervene with Cox, with Channel 12, but actually with PBS as well, to be able to secure some time there. So Stephanie Bales has been working with the team here at the district to work on that. We're running into some little roadblocks with the broadcast part, but we're working through those to be able to do that, to provide some of those, online type lessons that are our actual teachers and people in our community using our standards-based lessons, those types of things. Something we would need to run more than once because, running at 9 o'clock in the morning might not work for all families, but we're working through that right now.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. McNeely.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that all of the parents and citizens who have contacted us or through phone, through email, I certainly appreciate it. We have plenty of time now to take a look at what our constituents say. And so I've always picked up the phone once I hear something, share it with the superintendent or share it with our deputy or our K-12 person, Mrs. Wise. I'm going to always interject to see what can we do as a recommendation from all of the different folk that are tuning into us relatively a lot now. And so I'm sure that Mrs. Alford, Miss Alexander, Miss Crosby, Miss Bridgewater Alford will get some type of response. I've noticed that the superintendent has been writing back, but that's from her perspective as well. But I'm not so sure what we're doing as colleagues to try to answer some of the people that have contacted us as well, or that some kind of way, and Mr. Delaney can help us with that, is to give us a solution where we can actually have discussion if it's not on the general agenda. But I want to bring up, because we won't have another meeting for 2 weeks, and we'll be well into late part of this distance learning. I'm very concerned about, and I've already spoken to Mrs. Clark, what might happen during the summer months, especially for our DA schools, but not just DA schools, all of the students. The more I've thought about it, yes, we have students that are struggling at Williams, at Lake Forest, at Idlewild, but I'd like to see this happen for all children in our system. We talk about customized planning, and I had a citizen today to talk for a whole hour on customized enrichment planning. What are we doing about that? And I know that our staff has had a lot on their mind, our minds, plural, but I certainly don't want us to get close to June and we don't have something in place, and we need to give some type of encouragement or recommendations to the superintendent and her staff. I think that all of our students who are doing quite well with instruction, and they could be our A students, they are going to still need some type of preparation. They're going to get their A's anyway, but we still need to look at every single kid in our system. What can we do to customize? Because what Eileen needs may not be what Robert needs. And so we can't do a one size fits all curriculum. That means money, because that means if we are going to customize for instruction for our kids, then that means that one child like Robert or David may be struggling where Karen and Tina are not. So they're not going to need as much focus. Eileen and Leonetta won't need any because we're so smart. But I'm thinking that we have to look at something long range, and we need to look at what are we going to do come July? What will we do up until we go back in the fall, if we are going back? But I think that we need to look at the constituents and parents with their recommendations, take all of our recommendations, hopefully, and then see how we can narrow things that we need to do. The assignments, I heard from 2 parents today that, and you heard it tonight, it's quite overwhelming if you have 1 child or if you have 5 in the household. One of the things that you cannot do, even with our wonderful Wi-Fi buses, if you've got 1 device and you're sitting in the parking lot with that particular child to finish their electronic lesson, then you've got 4 others sitting on the back seat or in the front seat needing the same kind of support and help. I know that we will listen, and I know that this experience has been great for me because it makes you reflect even more as to how are we meeting the needs of our children, our students, all of them. And I'm gonna back away from just saying DA, but I know when we go back in the fall, if we go back to the normal way and the state jumps back in with all of the testing that they have missed doing this year, this spring, it's going to be horrendous what will be laid upon the students who need and who are most vulnerable and will need the extra help. I'm saying not only summer and what can we do leading up to this, but what's going to happen further. This is something that the superintendent and her team will really have to focus on. I really have an interest in what the performance of our students are going to look like? What is the whole district? And I don't think the DOE or Cochrane or any of the leadership in Tallahassee is going to sit back and say, well, you received a waiver, we gave you a pass, now we're back to metal on metal. I think we are going to have to do more in order to keep up. And that means going back to Mr. Rella to see where can we find the funds to do all of these things that we need to do. We cannot afford to fall any further behind in our state system. So we need to capitalize on what we can do possibly for our children at this point. We've done wonderful things in getting the hot spots, getting the teachers ready to gear it up. And as Ms. Clark said, many of the teachers were well ahead of the curve. They had been working all along, but there are many teachers, Madam Chair, that have not had the necessary training that we were thinking that they were going to have, and they were just like me, not comfortable with technology or whatever. So there are a lot of variables that I'm trying to share at this point with you. Not only instructional promise for students, but what can we do better for our instructional staff and non-instructional personnel as well. They need to be, I don't like the word coddle, but they need to be encouraged and to give them the necessary resources to help them become better with technology. We can have the best teachers in the world in our system, but if they are not accustomed to doing what we are expecting them to do now, we are putting them in a position that's very overwhelming. I'd like to speak more when we have our next board meeting, because I'm sure that the superintendent will give us an update, but I certainly want to hear, and I'm spelling it out, what's going to happen with performance? How will we generate instruction during the summer, and for what kids? Hopefully, as the word says, customized for every single student. If we have 27,500, I'd like to see how we will customize for all of those kids. I rest my case right now. I'm using Mr. Delaney's terminology, rest my case. I may come back. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dr. McNeely.
Madam
Yeah.
Chair.
Yes, Mr. Hyatt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to say, first of all, we don't say this very often in this room. We're not in the room, so I guess we can say it. I wanted to thank Governor DeSantis because he made the right decision to, and that's underlined, he didn't end school for the rest of the year, but he continued with distance learning. And I know that everyone's heart in this that's listening at home and that's here online with all of us was heavy over this, and always thinking of what's the safest for our children, for our employees, for our citizens. And so when the governor makes the correct decision, I want to say, yes, thank you. I appreciate that. And I know that I really appreciate Dr. McNeely 2 or 3 times this evening mentioning what nobody likes to mention, and that is if we come back in August. And we all hope we are. We all hope everything's going to be as it is, as it was as far as schedule. But this is something we have to be concerned about. and I'm confident that we're going to be ready either way. And I did want to underline that in the time of pandemic, I think we're all blessed by the arts and being able to see music and theater and listening to music and you know, we're the band programs and the chorus programs in Alachua County will not go anywhere. Whenever we come back, they will be back. Now, I wanted to also, first of all, thank a few people. First of all, Mr. Moore, who put all this together and has been taking the lead on that. I don't think any of these courses were part of his law school curriculum, but he's done a great job in figuring out how to make us available to the public, and that's the most important thing we can do. That's equally important as anything we do together. Also, our teachers who on basically no notice, other than maybe, I guess they did have a spring break to help, have turned on a dime and have really come up with creativity. I think creativity is the cornerstone of everything for success and during this time and moving forward. I wanted to thank our incredible food service, Ms. Eunice. That's been pointed out already by the superintendent. And we are so proud of that whole team. Also, our transportation department, who came on board and now they are delivering lessons. They are delivering meals. They are now providing Wi-Fi. And so again, we're all having to change a little bit, or a lot, and transportation it was up to the task. I'd like to thank the superintendent and her team. Again, this is new for everybody, but there hasn't been any whining. There hasn't been any woe is me from anyone in the district. It's what can we get done? What's best for our students? What's best for our students and families? And what can we do to make it happen? So, and I am very proud of that. And I think also when we do go back, and I do share Dr. McNeely's caution, I hope that we will continue to be in close contact with our local health department and make sure that any decision we make is based on science and the best interest of all of our people in the county. So again, thank you to my fellow board members. Thank you to our district. And I think we can all hold our head up high with what's happening. And I know it would only get better. Thank you very much.
Mr. Hyatt, I echo everything you said so eloquently. Thank you very much. And does anyone else like to speak under citizen comment? Board member comment?
Yes, I was trying to raise my hand. I'm not sure if Mr. Moore's.
I didn't see it. I'm sorry.
Okay. No. I put it up. I wasn't sure if Mr. Moore was monitoring it for you, but I wanted to ask Superintendent Clark if she was going to, or if it's in her plan, based on the two emails that we received from parents about the grading, to kind of, I guess my thing is, I know we're not pass fail, and there has to be a grade. It seems like from DOE, they haven't allowed us to go to a pass fail option, but I think some parameters need to be put around the grace and compassion, or compassion and grace, however it's being said, because I think it's I don't think it's fair or it's equitable for at one school, there to be one standard of what this means, and another school, it'd be another standard, especially for the high school students and the students who are dependent on grades, as Ms. Simon's email said, for college admissions and all of that. And part of the main reason I heard that from Jacob Oliva, that they didn't want to go to pass fail, is because how that impacts the GPA for Bright Futures. So I think as a district, I think the leadership, coming from you down to the principals and thus to the teachers, needs to be something that we don't harm the students. I mean, they're not in class, and this was turned around. We're in a new reality here. And I'm not saying we don't require anything of the students, but by the same token, I don't think the standard that was in place before all of this happened, before the pandemic, should be the same. So, and I think that there should be some definition at the elementary school as to guidelines as to how the grading should be done. And I think a different standard at the middle school, and then again at the high school. I just think to leave it out there for each teacher or principal, administrator to define on their own, I think is going to be, it's subjective, and I wouldn't want my child, if I had a student, to be in that situation, because if they're in a particular situation where there's a really stringent or a strict standard, and then another one is offering a whole lot of leeway, then, I don't think that's fair. So I think if they get some guidance from the superintendent, I think that would be most helpful, as well as to the parents. The parents are on their students, I don't know about anybody else, but I'll say when my son was a senior, I felt like that last 9 weeks I had to ride him like I was breaking a Bronco to keep him engaged to get going. So, and they're wanting, everything's so competitive now and all of that, but I don't think we should harm the students in any way, with the grade for all of this. So that was one thing I wanted. And I'm appreciative for the work that's been done. I think food service and all, I've heard a lot of good things from parents. The meals they've been getting, and the way that how responsive food service has been to them. So I'm appreciative to them. Mr. Hyatt said it in our special meeting, that the transportation department and food service, and how they are indeed, because we haven't been out in the public the way the city and the county has been. So food service and transportation has been the face of this organization, and making a very good impact. So I'm really thankful that they've done a good job for the most part. I haven't heard, I saw one negative thing on social media, but everybody has been very complimentary of them, and their services have been appreciated. And the other thing I'm concerned as well about summer school, I won't mention that anymore. But I will mention that I would like us to start now. I think it's imperative that we start looking at how we go forward, in the fall, and not wait until we get there. So we start doing some planning now, outlining what this will all look like. So we would be off to a good start, in the fall. Should we still be in distance learning? I'm hoping not, but should we be there, we would have a good start. So that's it. Thank everyone for all that's been done, and we keep going and working for the betterment of our students.
Thank you, Ms. Certain. Anybody else like to say something?
Ms. Roy, if I could, I'll just respond. Thank you, Ms. Certain, for your comments. The one thing about grading, I think that we all have to keep in mind, is grading is subjective. I mean, the whole parameter of grading, there's some objectivity to it, because you have, those certain ranges of grades and percentages used, but then there's also subjectivity. And even when we're not in this situation, when we're in a regular in-person school situation, teachers, that's their responsibility, is grading their students. And there's always going to be some teachers that are have way different grading policies. Grading policies vary, how much counts for certain things. Some teachers, 80% of their grade is tests or assessments, and in others it's 30, and in others it's 20. The key though is that we do have to remember, and that families are in very different situations with this pandemic, and how they're dealing with it is very different. And the involvement of parents is very different. And so teachers have to be able to keep that in mind as they are given the assignments. Even something as simple as how the assignments are given can impact how a family is feeling about it. If you give a student 2 weeks worth of work at one time, while that may send one message, whereas if you give that same amount of work, but you're given one assignment every day, that's a little less overwhelming for folks. So I think a piece of this also is, how are we communicating those grades, the grading expectations to our students and families? And we've had multiple discussions with our principals about that. We sent another reminder to them today about making sure that teachers are communicating those expectations, but also keeping in mind, because we want to keep it in the forefront of our staff members' minds. Families are all dealing with things very differently right now. And as on one hand, where we have folks feeling overwhelmed, we have other parents that have commented, and we've gotten feedback from, that they want more work and they want to make sure that their kids are extra challenged and they want more and more rigorous assignments. So we've got, lots of different opinions about grading and assignments and what goes into that. As I mentioned in the beginning, there's a lot of frustration that exists between students and families and parents and kind of this whole situation. So yes, I think we have to be clear, but we also have to recognize that there's that academic freedom piece with teachers as we are, as they plan their lessons, as they deliver their lessons and assignments. But there is no substitute for a highly qualified teacher in front of the student every single day. There's no substitute for that. And I don't want us to think that the type of instruction that the students are receiving is like that, because it's not. It's very different. And so we've asked those teachers to do is, we are going to provide the highest quality instruction possible during this time. But the key is communication in all of this. And we want to make sure that our teachers and our schools are communicating that with families. And I agree with Ms. Certain. As the Hippocratic Oath is, first do no harm. We don't want to do harm. But we also want to make sure that our students are giving an effort here. So I can't necessarily say that a student who has done absolutely nothing, even though there's been communication with the school and that they've just chosen not to do the work, I can't say that student is not going to receive a negative grade. But on the flip side, a student that is making that effort, maybe not doing as well on the assignment, but they are making that effort and they're attempting to turn in work, teachers see that and respond accordingly with those grades. So that's where some of that, where we talk about that compassion and grace, that's where that has to come in, recognizing that families are dealing with this all very differently. So for me to say a specific grading scale for a teacher or how they should calculate their grade, might be a little tough, but I think we've got to be able to allow the teachers to run their classrooms, but also be very clear in communication and expectations. If teachers are clear and parents have their questions answered with their teachers, I think things will go a lot better as part of that process.
It's probably part of the problem that I've been hearing is communication hasn't been consistent across the board. It's been inconsistent.
Mm-hmm.
And and I didn't realize that teachers had that much academic freedom, like at K through 12. I knew college level. I heard that before with my daughter, that there's academic freedom. I didn't realize they had that. And I've heard people get strung up and almost getting their license taken from them. So I didn't realize K through 12 teachers had the academic freedom in the realm and how you just described that. So that was new to me. But I think we got to make sure that teachers are communicating with families, and if they're not getting, I guess for one thing, like I don't think you have this info, like you weren't able to tell us how many students have been in contact with their teacher or how many have not been. Like of all of our student body population, has someone made contact once, twice, none? Because that would be, if someone's had no contact, of course, we can't say that they're going to be, they would do no harm. But I think that's what the complaint is from people that I've heard, is that it's been all over the place. And I do understand that different teachers have different expectations. In our DA schools, some of the issues that have come up is that there's such low expectations, the students rise to that low level of expectation. And when there's high expectation, they rise to that high level of expectation. But here, as was said in the email, people are dealing with this in different ways. And so I just want us to make sure that we try to at least be consistent as a district and we offer some guidance, because even on our call in the school, the FSBA call with board members, several members on Friday asked, what does grace and compassion look like? Give us some guidance on that. We keep hearing that said, and so this is a question, it's not just in Alachua County. Sure. Other folks in other counties had it also. So thank you.
So let me just, I'll explain what we said to the school. So the week we returned from spring break, If by the end of that week, a teacher had not been able to connect with the student, either virtually, via email, via phone, if they did not actually have contact, most of them started earlier than that, but the schools had to reach out and call. That's what a lot of our, deans, FSIM, those that are instructional personnel but didn't have a class assigned to them, they were calling, how do you have internet access? Do you have a device? How can we reach you? Sad to say, there were a lot of, we had some teachers report back to us that 20 to 25% of their students did not have up-to-date contact information in Skyward. And so they were really struggling. And so we actually have utilized our SROs to make home visits to families where we've not been able to contact via phone or email with those. So we asked that very first week because we wanted folks engaged immediately as soon as they got back from spring break. After that time, what we have said is at a minimum of once per week, there needs to be contact with the family. So some cases, it's an everyday thing. Students are submitting assignments every day. That's easy. But in other cases where they're not, we have asked for that contact at least once per week, if not more often, if it's needed by that family, to be able to successfully complete their assignments or to reach out for other support, especially in cases where we might have ESE students who need additional support, or English language learners, those sorts of things. So there has been some guidance that we have issued from the district as that regard. And we've reminded them at each of our calls with our principals about that clear communication with our families. So obviously, if it's still not happening in some of those families, then we need to do a better job with that and reiterate that some more to make sure that we are having that communication, because that part can be very frustrating. And we don't want that. We need to try to ease as much of these stressors as possible. It's stressful enough, the situation we're in. Our job is to try to ease some of that as much, at least the part we can control.
All righty, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. Thank you, Ms. Certain. Anything else?
Mrs. Roy, I had a question for the superintendent.
Sure.
As far as, I guess it would be related in some manner to grading, but if you have parents who are not able, whether it's because they are out of the home working or they have difficulty with the subject themselves, what do we have in place for assistance with that? I'm not sure we've been able to capitalize on that.
Right. And that one obviously is a little bit more difficult because it's not like we have a teacher in front of the student to teach a lesson to the student and then a student complete an assignment. But again, that's where that communication is key. That if a parent is, again, we talk about math and how math, the way it's taught now, looks a little different than probably when all of us learned math. And so there may be some concerns about that, but that's where we've got to keep that clear line of communication. If a teacher is seeing that a student is not turning in particular assignments or they're all incorrect, something like that, or if the parent is saying, I'm really struggling helping my student in one way or the other, what extra support can we provide? But that's where the communication has to happen. We have to know that. Communication has to be a two-way street here. So we need our teachers to reach out. But if parents have those questions, we need them to reach out as well. We've got the ability that if they need, a Google Meets call or not necessarily a Zoom call, I don't know that everybody has that access, but like the Google Hangout call, Google Meet, that we can do that. And they can, have a face-to-face online with their teachers, school administrators, counselors, whoever they need. We can certainly arrange that as well. Whatever parents need, we can do that.
Thank you.
Anything else? Well, I want to thank the board members for their very thoughtful, in-depth conversations and suggestions and, feedback to everyone at the district. Mr. Hyatt did such a wonderful job of thanking everyone. I want to add thank you to the parents and the students who are all struggling as much as a lot of other people in the district are. But I think the district has done a magnificent job and very proud of what we've done for the community and the students. So if there's no other comments, I
Mr.
will.
Roy, I have not said, I think, and I'd like to thank our administration and our teachers too, and our EA.
Absolutely.
It's incredible the job they've done. And I just want to make sure I get that into. And I think we're in
Thank you.
uncharted waters. And
Thank
it's
you.
amazing what they're doing.
I agree. Thank you very much, Dr. Paulson. Anybody else?
Mrs. Roy, I just want to remind you, we go into the Leasing Corp meeting as soon as
That's
this.
right.
budget-
I have it on my notes here. So, okay, the meeting is adjourned, and let us go then to the Leasing Corp meeting, which follows this meeting immediately. This is the special meeting of the Alachua County School Board Leasing Corporation, April 21st, 2020. And I will turn it over to Mr. Rella, who's in charge of all this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Roy, and welcome to the special meeting of the Alachua County School Board Leasing Corp. Today, April 21st. As you can see, we do have an agenda. First order of business is roll call. Please let the record show that the president, vice president, treasurer, and all officers of the Leasing Corp are present at this meeting. Item number 2 is the proof of due notice of the meeting. As you can see, this meeting was advertised in the Gainesville Sun April 14th as required by law. Item number 3 is disposal of the minutes. I'm sure everyone has had time to look at the minutes of the November 19th, 2019 reorganization meeting. I will entertain a motion for the approval of these minutes.
So move.
Moved by Ms.
Mr.
Certain and seconded by Ms. Roy. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. And the motion carries 5-0. Item number 4, reports of officers and committees. I'm very happy to report that all of our COP lease payments have been made. And of course, we continue to meet our financial obligations for the Leasing Corporation. Item number 5, unfinished business. There's no unfinished business for the Leasing Corp at this time. And then the real item and the reason for this meeting, of course, is the new business, the COPS resolution that mirrors the resolution that the school board approved. The superintendent recommends adoption of resolution number COP 20-08 as presented, and I will turn it over for any discussion. Seeing no discussion. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor say aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. And the motion carries 5-0. And that is the last item on the agenda. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rella. Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
All right.